Judy Shelton's views are breathtakingly extreme and retrograde. She actually seems to prefer the economic policies that foregrounded the Great Depression. She has openly advocated a return to the gold standard. She has long questioned the need for federal deposit insurance. And in March 2009, in the midst of our last economic crisis, she questioned, why do we need a central bank? Imagine someone like Ms. Shelton, with her retrograde views, sitting on the Federal Reserve during a time of economic crisis. Imagine someone like that making decisions about monetary policy back in April, when our economy was in free fall. We should not confirm to the Federal Reserve someone who would likely stymie efforts to dig ourselves out of this economic crisis. I urge every one of my colleagues, Democrat and Republican, to reject this terrible, terrible nomination. COVID-19, as we know, unfortunately, has upended nearly every aspect of American life for the better part of a year. But as impatient as we all are for our lives to return to normal, the harsh truth of the matter is that coming months may be by far the worst of the pandemic. Cases have skyrocketed to well over 150,000 Americans per day. We're now recording more than 1 million new COVID cases a week. Hospital ICUs and morgues in many parts of the country are approaching or are even beyond capacity. Americans must brace themselves for a long winter. We cannot tire of the simple precautions that limit the spread of the disease and save lives. Wear a mask, social distance, avoid large indoor gatherings, stay vigilant. We must all continue to do our part to prevent this next surge from overwhelming our health systems and endangering our fellow citizens. Congress as well should be doing all that's necessary to support those efforts and prevent the worst from happening. Too many Americans have lost health care coverage as a result of losing their jobs this year. Medicaid has seen a huge increase in new enrollees and needs resources. As unemployment remains in the tens of millions, extending unemployment insurance is paramount, and many more things besides. Speaker Pelosi and I have been in regular communication with President-elect Biden and his transition team. Unlike the current administration, the incoming administration wants to move rapidly to get a handle on the virus and recover our economy. Today, President-elect Biden urged the Senate to pass the HEROES Act, comprehensive legislation that leaves no one behind. That's just the right approach. Our country deserves a bill that meets the needs of the American people, that meets the needs of the moment. If Leader McConnell and our Republican colleagues want to sit down and negotiate a bipartisan solution with a bipartisan process, Democrats are ready and willing and able to do so. But unfortunately, it's been 2 weeks since Leader McConnell said he was in charge of negotiating the next COVID-19 relief bill, and he still hasn't spoken to Speaker Pelosi or myself. We have 14 votes on the floor this week on nominations for a lame duck president, but we have nothing pertaining to COVID. There is, however, a bit of good news today. A second U.S. company announced that it has discovered an effective vaccine in phase 3 trials. Early figures suggest it's close to 95% effective. As these two vaccines move through the final approval process, we should prepare the country to produce and distribute them to everyone in a comprehensive bill that includes robust vaccine funding. Finally, there is light at the end of the tunnel, but we're still in that tunnel, and may be so for several months. So we must pull together once again to do everything in our individual power to turn the tide of the virus. On elections, instead of working to pull the country back together so we can fight our common enemy, COVID-19, the Republican majority is busy spreading conspiracy theories, denying reality, poisoning the well of our democracy. It seems like Republicans all over Washington are auditioning for profiles in cowardice, nudging each other aside to say who can say the most outlandish thing in support of President Trump's baseless claims of election fraud. Two members of this chamber went so far as to accuse their state's election result of not being delivered honestly, because President Trump didn't win. They demanded their own Secretary of State, a fellow Republican, resign. The two senators provided no evidence, not a shred, to support the claim that the election wasn't conducted honestly. A Republican governor this weekend supported the idea of states sending alternative slates of electors to the Electoral College. He encouraged Republican state legislatures in states that voted for Joe Biden to literally ignore the will of the voters to send electors who would vote for Donald Trump. I understand my Republican colleagues dislike the results of the presidential election, but this has gone beyond ridiculous. This is reckless. President Trump is working to convince millions of Americans that the election wasn't fair and was stolen without a scrap of evidence. Whatever fears my colleagues might have about President Trump abandoning their party if they don't show sufficient support, that's no excuse for sanctioning his efforts to discredit our democratic elections. The percentage of Republicans who now believe that the election was not free and fair has doubled to 70%, 7-0, in the United States of America. How much longer will Senate Republicans stand by while President Trump shreds Americans' faith in our democracy? So I have a very simple message for my colleagues. The election is over. President Trump lost. Joe Biden will be the next president of the United States. Kamala Harris will be the next vice president of the United States. All over the country, legal claims by the president are being laughed out of court. Ironically, the president's legal challenges have accomplished one thing. They have revealed just how secure our elections were. As courts from Pennsylvania to Michigan to Arizona dismiss these claims, they're confirming there is no credible evidence of fraud or irregularities. So far, not one vote has been tossed out. These are facts. And the longer Republicans refuse to acknowledge them, the more damage is done. In order to keep up this charade, the Trump administration is now actually denying national security briefings to President-elect Biden. It is actively refusing to coordinate with the incoming administration on the coronavirus. How unimaginably stupid is that? We shouldn't even be discussing for 1 minute whether or not Republicans will accept the democratic results of our presidential election, or whether the next president should receive security briefings. That should be a given. But it appears, sadly, unfortunately, that our Republican colleagues will follow President Trump all the way down the rabbit hole to the very bitter end of his very bitter presidency. And every day that goes by, the more damage is done to our country, to our national security, to our ability to fight COVID, and to Americans' faith in our democracy. So I plead with my Republican colleagues, stop denying reality, stop recklessly sowing doubt about our democratic process, stop going down to the lowest common denominator that President Trump seems to live with all the time, and start focusing on COVID. Let's bring this country together and get some things done. I yield the floor. Note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.